Our third talk is going to be given by Sebastian Roth, who is a first-year PhD student at CISPA, and he works on web security.
So thanks for the warm introduction. I'm Sebastian, and I'm going to present you how the content security policy has evolved over the course of time. This is joint work with Nick and Tim from Stony, Brook, Stefano from Venice, and Ben from CISPA. So let's start with a short refresh of what the content security policy is actually about. Well, one of the most prevalent vulnerabilities in web applications is cross-site scripting, and to perform those kinds of attacks, an attacker lures the victim's browser into loading malicious JavaScript. And in the example that you can see here, the victim's browser is lured into issuing a GET request to a vulnerable website. And in this request, there is a script tag. And due to the nature of this attack, this script tag is then later on reflected in the response. And therefore, the victim's browser will load the script, the evil script from evil.com. And because the script runs in the context of the vulnerable website, it can do whatever legitimate code from there can do. So hijack the session ID, steal credentials, perform state-changing actions, and so on. To mitigate the effect of those markup injections, CSP has been introduced. So as soon as the server has a correct CSP header in its response, the evil script is not even requested by the server, by the victim's browser. So let's take a look into how such a policy actually looks like. Well, in its initial release in 2012, CSP was created to restrict script content. So the developer was able to create an origin-based whitelist or allowing the execution of inline JavaScript with the unsafe inline expression. However, this would also allow an attacker to execute inline JavaScript. Therefore, in 2014, they added support for nonces to the CSP standard. And by embedding such a nonce as an attribute to a script tag, the developer is now able to whitelist specific inline scripts. However, if those inline scripts now programmatically adds other scripts, as it is common in the wild, for example, for advertisement, those scripts will not be executed unless they are not again be present in the origin-based whitelist. Therefore, they added the strict dynamic expression in 2016, and if this strict dynamic expression is present, all programmatically added, all scripts that are whitelisted and programmatically add scripts will propagate the trust to the added scripts. So as you can see, the CSP has evolved over the course of time, and to ease the deployment of a sane policy, but it has also grown from into a multi-tool for web security purposes, but more on this later. Another thing that we know from previous studies about CSP is that the adoption of CSP is not as good as it ought to be. However, and also that many of the deployed policies are trivially bypassable. What we try to answer with our research is why this is the case. So why is the adoption that low? For what use case is CSP actually used in the wild? And what are the problems of deploying a sane CSP? So therefore, we decided to conduct a study with the top 10,000 websites over the course of time and build an intersection of the average Alexa top lists between 2012 and end of 2018. Then we used the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine to collect more than 20,000 CSP headers. And afterwards, we cross-checked the validity of this data with a similar service called Common Crawl. Finally, we clustered the collected CSPs into their different use cases and analyzed the directives of those CSPs. Furthermore, we have taken a detailed look onto the deployment strategies for real-world websites And later on, we also asked developers about their opinion on CSP. Well, let's start with the first use case of CSP and also the initial use case of CSP, script content control. As you can see in the upper blue line, the overall CSP adoption is increasing. However, its initial use case is only used in around 40% of all policies in the wild, as you can see at the red line. Naturally, this means there are other use cases as well, but let's first deep dive into the script restricting capabilities of CSP. As already shown by related work, insecure practices are dominating the usage of CSP for that use case. For time reasons, I will only talk about the most common insecure practices here. So as you can see in the dashed blue line, almost every policy out there allows the execution of inline JavaScript. And also whitelisting entire schemata is very common in CSP, as you can see in the dotted green line. Although present since 2016, nonces are only used by less than 10 websites in the wild. And what we also tried to do is to find out why unsafe inline is used that frequently. And here we have seen that this is most probably due to inline event handlers being used on nearly half of the front pages of the unsafe inline websites. And inline event handlers actually requires unsafe inline to, well, work. So here, then we ask the question whether deploying CSP is really that hard. So let's take a detailed look on an example. Airbnb, for example, started their journey to a secure CSP in November 2014 with a policy in report-only mode. Those policies are not enforced, but violations are reported back to the developer. And then in March 2015, they added the whole HTTPS schema to their whitelist, so they allow every HTTPS resource to be loaded. Then in May 2015, they changed their policy from report only to enforcement mode, while the HTTPS schemata is still one of the whitelisted sources. Then 222 changes later, in December 2017, the whitelist has grown, but the HTTPS schemata is still one of the whitelisted sources. At that point in time, they started experimenting with a secure report-only policy on single days. And in January 2018, they had a first try with their new and sane policy in enforcement mode. However, after less than 1 day, they added the HTTPS schemata again, probably due to some fatal errors that occurred in their application. Then finally, in March 2018, they had a second try for their sane CSP, and finally they arrived at a secure and functional CSP that was present until the end of our data period. So, as most of you know, Airbnb's main business is their web application, and it is a big company, but still they needed more than 3.5 years to build a sane CSP. As already hinted at, there are more use cases of CSP besides the restriction of script content, namely the enforcement of secure network connections. In fact, the usage of CSP as TLS enforcement mechanism even surpasses the script content restriction in August 2018, as you can see at the green line. But how can we actually enforce TLS via CSP? Well, the red line at the bottom shows you CSPs that whitelists only the HTTPS schemata. So, and the dotted golden line shows you the usage of the block all mixed content directive. In both cases, those technologies will just block all HTTP requests from happening. So in the dashed blue line, you can see the prevalence of the better and more frequently used alternative. And by using upgrade insecure requests, the browser will upgrade all HTTP requests to HTTPS on the fly, which makes it a great utility for TLS migration, because you can leave your hard-coded HTTP links in your legacy code. So, We further investigated this process of using upgrade insecure requests for TLS migration and indeed found cases where it was used for transition from HTTP to HTTPS. For example, Wired.com started deploying HTTPS in June 2016 with enabled upgrade insecure requests, but they removed their last HTTP resource from their start page only in September 2017. We also tried to investigate the hypothetical impact of if all current sites would use upgrade insecure requests to get rid of their mixed content problems. Therefore, we called the Alexa 10,000 pages, start pages, and found mixed content on nearly half of them. In nearly 90% of those cases, all HTTP resources that we found were also available via HTTPS. So it would easy for those sites to get rid of all their mixed content problems by just deploying upgrade insecure requests. Okay, let's talk about something different that is highly relevant for the web, cat pictures. Everyone loves them, right? So everyone wants to see more of them. However, clicking on buttons might be dangerous due to click-checking attacks, where an attacker lures the victim into clicking on, for example, an instant buy button, which is in an opaque iframe over the cat button. Therefore, in 2009, Microsoft introduced XRAM options. And as all X headers, this was never standardized. So the different browser vendors did not implement it consistently. This leads to security problems like the partial support of some modes of XRAM options, but also the possibility for double framing attacks. In addition to the security problems of XFO, it also has functionality problems because you can only whitelist one single entry, but of course some sites would like to be frameable by multiple of their partner websites. So to fix those issues, CISPA introduced the frame ancestors as directive. And as you can see in the golden line, this new feature of CISPA is nearly used as often as the other two use cases that you have seen. But how does frame ancestors actually address the problems of the XFO header? Well, it is a well-defined standard in CISPA since 2014, so all modern browsers support it in the same way. However, legacy browsers like the Internet Explorer do not support it at all. Furthermore, frame ancestors, according to the standard, applies to all ancestors of the frame, and not only the topmost frame. So double framing is not a problem anymore. And as similar to the other directives of CISPA, it has an explicit whitelist, so you have wildcards and can have multiple source expressions. So it is also easier to maintain and to use in comparison to XFrame options. As a consequence, developer should tend to use frame ancestors rather than XFrame options, right? Sadly, the real world shows a different picture. Since its deprecation in the late summer of 2012, the usage of XFO explodes, while the usage of frame ancestors lags far behind it. Even less websites use both headers, which would be the preferable options to provide backwards compatibility to, for example, the Internet Explorer. However, we wanted to understand why this is the case, and we also wanted to notify the only XFO websites about the better alternative for their security. Therefore, we notified nearly 2,700 sites about their problem using only XFO rather than CISPA, and we received 117 responses from them. So the operators in those responses claimed to deploy frame ancestors soon. Others explained that CISPA is far too complex for them to be deployed. And others also confessed that they have never heard of frame ancestors before. So those numbers shows us, those responses showed us that developers do not know about CISPA's capabilities. And that developers have the misconceptions that the different CISPA features cannot be used in isolation. So this answer, for example, indicated that the operator is scared of using content security policy because, in his opinion, it kills the functionality of their web application. As said, we only asked them to use frame ancestors rather than XFO, So there's the clear misconception here that the different CSP features cannot be used in isolation. In this answer, for example, also indicated there's that problem. Yeah. So it also thinks that although you have seen that frame ancestors is easier to use than XFO, they have, in their opinion, every feature of CSP is far too complex to be deployed. We also sent a survey to each one that responded to our bulk mails. And here, the majority says that CSP can effectively mitigate the effect of cross-site scripting attacks. However, the majority also said that a sane CSP would not work for the application without massive and complex redesign of their source code. So let's shortly recap what we have seen in the last 15 minutes. CSP for script content control is often too complex in practice, as we have seen in the example of Airbnb, where they needed more than 3.5 years to deploy a sane policy. And we have also seen that CSP has grown into a multi-tool for web security purposes. We have secure and easy-to-use features such as TLS enforcement and framing control. However, misconceptions about CSP and the too complex script control mechanism seems to block the easy-to-use features of CSP. So as you can see, there is still work to be done, especially regarding the usability of CSP in the wild, so such that CSP actually gets the attention that it deserves. So thanks for your attention, and feel free to ask questions.
Victor Pochak, K Leuven. How easy is it to migrate from the X-frame options to the CSP alternative? And did you suggest to the developers that you emailed how they could migrate?
It is very easy because, as said, in X-frame options, you can only have one whitelisted entry, which is also possible in frame ancestors. And we also explained them in the email that it is very easy because they can take the origin from their whitelisted allow from X-frame option source and simply place it behind the frame ancestors directive. But yeah, as you have seen, most of the responses were, well, that it would be far too complex to do this, and yeah, so the reputation of the script content control seems to block the people from actually using the easy-to-use features.
Okay, thank you.
I have a follow-on question. So these sorts of misconceptions that happen in practice, we've seen in other cases, like for example, with patching, right? So what is your opinion? How should we go about? What would be more effective in convincing these practitioners and developers that these things are actually not that complicated and are actually important?
So I think a good idea would be, for example, to split up CSP into, well, not be one gigantic and complex tool, but rather split it up into, a tool for cross-site scripting mitigation and a tool for actual content control, and such that, well, the complex script restriction capabilities are not blocking the easy-to-use parts like TLS migration, framing control, and also content control in general.